Hello, this is Signals and Insights, the podcast. I am Gabriel Velez, CEO of Crowd Answers. My guest today has spent over 25 years doing one thing, decoding how teens and young adults actually think, buy, and behave. For brands like Disney, Google, Nike, American Express. He calls himself Gen Z Whisperer, and after reading his work, I'll say that it's very well named. Gary Rudman, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Looking forward to having this conversation.
Perfect. So yeah, you told me the path, like a young brand advertising on Kraft and Oscar Mayer, then Teenage Research Unlimited in Chicago, where you were literally fifth employee out of San Francisco, BP and FCB, and then the 2001 layoff that became the launchpad for your own firm. Looking back, was getting data of the best thing that ever happened to your career? The push you needed to bet everything into youth research?
Yeah, I mean, it was a interesting. As you mentioned, I was working in advertising. I had a call from a headhunter, and I went to Teenage Research Unlimited, expecting not to take the job. It was in the suburbs of Chicago, where I didn't want to be. I was right out of college. I wanted to have the city life experience, and it was a suburban place next to a Olive Garden and a Fridays, and I was not interested in being there. But I was hired in the interview because the gentleman there, Peter Zolo, and I definitely had the same approach, and I already had some experience with the youth culture, and it really kind of helped me understand and get a sense for what was interesting in terms of working in market research and working with this audience, this sort of kid, teen, young adult audience. And so when I did get laid off from FCB in Chicago after I'd left True, I started this as a kind of a whim. It's what I knew. It's what it was easy for me to go back to. But I was fortunate that almost right off the bat, I got a contract with Unilever and had got to work for 10 years on Axe body spray, introducing not the world, the US market to helping US teens smell even worse than they already do by putting way too much Axe body spray cologne on them. And so every time you'd walk down an aisle in a supermarket or drugstore, you'd hear and you'd see teenage boys spraying the different scents and trying to get a feel for what was the right one for them. Because of course, the advertising campaign, if you remember, was if you spray this stuff on, women will come. And they all knew it wasn't true, but but maybe it was. So you wouldn't want to take a chance of not using it. So they all did. Anyway, I got a chance to work on that brand for 10 years, and it led to so many other things. Working with Ubisoft for 15 years, and for Disney Interactive for 5 years, and Electronic Arts for 5 years, and Fruit of the Loom, talking to people about underwear and sweatpants and sweatshirts. But all of those things have been so interesting because when you're talking to a younger audience, it's always just more interesting because you're learning new things every day, and it's always a surprise.
Indeed, indeed. And I am sure that you have very good stories to tell about that. Talking about stories, you told me a story that I keep thinking about. Like a financial firm came to you, convinced things were using banks, and you came back with this generation has never walked into a bank, never talked to a teller, doesn't use cash. So the gap between what brands assume and what's actually true feels like the whole reasons you exist. And where does that gap come from? And what do brands keep getting wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the issue is that there is this expectation that Gen Z and Gen Alpha will follow in the footsteps of the previous generations. They'll do what they did. So you use that example of going to the bank. You know, when we were young, we would go to the bank, we'd give the teller a passbook, we would give them they would fill out on a typically when I was young, they would fill out a piece of the passbook with handwritten, and they hand it back to you with how much money you had in the account. And that was how you dealt with money. And nowadays, like you said, teenagers have never been to the bank. They've never talked to a teller. They've never had that experience. So when you're working with companies that are trying to talk to this audience, you have to. What my job is, and what I've really tried to do throughout my career, is to sort of help these brands, these marketers, put the lens of this generation on and try to see the world through their eyes. Now, every generation is going to be different. Every generation is going to say they're going to buck authority. They're going to sort of say that things are different than before. I'm not going to go do the old way. But what makes it this? There's so many factors that have led to this generation being significantly different than previous generations. We had um, first of all, these are digital natives. These are individuals who've grown up with their iPhone, with their smartphones and their smart TVs and their smart everything from the get go. They've known how to access the world, and they have that information at their fingertips. And second of all, they grew up in a world of COVID, where a lot of their formative years were happening, behind a screen at their home. We had Gen Alpha who grew up in an era, again, formative years of Gen Alpha where they were told, don't talk to strangers, don't go close to them, don't go near them, stay away, be safe, stay at home. So there's a lot of discomfort in the real world. There's a lot more comfort in having a screen between you and the uh, between you and the person you're talk to, and that's led to certain behaviors that I think the older generations just don't know and haven't experienced. And so you have things, just generally speaking, there is a distrust of authority because back when we were younger, if you had a question, you would ask an authority figure, an adult. Maybe you'd look it up in a book. But that was your information. If some crazy aunt told you that if you ate watermelon seeds, you'd grow a watermelon in your stomach, you would believe them. Or if you crossed your eyes, they'd stick like that. But nowadays, they just check their phone and go, "Oh no, that's not true. I just looked it up." And now, I have three Gen Z children, and my middle son is sort of the prototypical Gen Zer, because he will look at the phone, and it doesn't matter the source. If it's on there, it must be true. And so I almost said, "Well, where did you get that information?" "I don't know. I just looked it up." Okay. So again, it's just a matter of looking at the world through their eyes and realize how they are unwilling to sort of just go along with what's being said, what authorities are saying. Um, uh, Going back to that bank example, I spoke to a young bank executive who was 23 maybe. She had just started at Morgan Stanley, I think. And I assumed that she was just, she had bought into the system. But when I spoke to her, I actually sent her a copy of a Gen Z presentation that I have. And I said, "Would you mind looking at this?" And she looked at it and she said, "Oh my gosh, you nailed it." Like a big thing we talk about is trust, that this generation doesn't trust authority because again, they can always look it up and see if it's true or not, and they can form their own opinions. And she said to me, "Look, I don't listen to the bosses. I don't listen to the authority figure because they don't have my best interest in mind. I do. And I can find this out for myself and find out the right answer. Again, not necessarily vetted correctly. They aren't necessarily checking sources, but they have a way, and especially with AI now, there's a way of quickly looking up to see what alternative points of view are without having to talk to the people that think they know everything."
That's great, and it's amazing that basically we are leading to the meat of this podcast with a young people that are more independent, more self sufficient, but at the same time they're a little bit less social, and I like that basically approach and the way that you coined this term talkwardness. So basically, that's the challenge Jane Sears has communicating with the strangers in an offline, unrestricted space. And you described it as a real energy that you can feel, right? Like a lack of eye contact, the silence, the discomfort. What first made you put a name to that, and how big deal it is really for how this generation moves through the world?
Well, again, I think what we talked about a minute ago is that the idea of there's just this general comfort of having a screen between you and the person you talk to, because that's their comfort zone. That's how they came of age with a screen. To communicate with someone, they would communicate with someone through a screen. When you get into the real world, you suffer from talkwardness, right? You're awkward, it's uncomfortable. You don't want to feel, you're afraid of what you might say or do that hasn't been previously, self vetted to make sure that you're saying the right thing. Of course, this generation makes mistakes and sends the wrong things via text or the voicemail or whatever they do. Not voicemail, mostly text. They are they have the ability to sort of to craft it so it's just so right. They're projecting an image. They're setting the right selfie, not the first one they took, but the third one they took, so on and so forth. But what's interesting is that that's also caused them to be uncomfortable in the real world because they don't have that ability. Additionally, everyone else that they're around has the ability to capture what they say or what they do for all to see. In the old days, if you tripped in the cafeteria at school, you might have been made fun of by, the three kids that saw you do it, or maybe it got spread around school for that day. Oh, that's the kid who tripped in the cafeteria. Nowadays, might have been recorded, and you might get home and your parents say, "Oh, I saw this TikTok, and you were on it." You know, the whole world could see some embarrassing thing that you did. So it's just that much more uh, um, discomforting to think, okay, what if I say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing? And there's just because teenagers as a whole, and Gen Z aren't all teenagers, but if you think about teenagers as a whole, there's always an awkwardness there, right? They're coming into their own, they're growing, they're developing, things are awkward and uncomfortable. But this is even more so because anything you do could be amplified by 1,000-fold. Uh, we also have a trend we call social buffering, which is sort of the idea of this not being able to read the room. So again, if you don't have if you are a good tennis player and you practice a lot, you become really good at tennis, right? But if you don't practice and you just go out occasionally to play, you're not going to be very good. The same thing with this generation is because they've had so much experience behind the screen. When they get into a real social situation, reading the room is much more difficult because they just don't have the practice. They haven't. It's not to say they can't do it. It's just to say that they're more rusty at it. So maybe they don't know what to say, or they don't know what the appropriate thing to say is, or how to say it, or what to do in that situation. And then that comes across as this awkwardness and uncomfortable, and it all kind of becomes this big uncomfortable package of like, oh, it's so much safer for me to be behind a screen.
Yeah, yeah, that's great, right? And I mean, this is very interesting. But if I push a little, because basically I can be on the other side, and sometimes you have this conversation with clients. Um, every older generation says the kids can socialize anymore. Right? I mean, it had been, when TV started, internet started, for device. Um, why this era is generally different and not just the usual phones and running everything kind of
Mm.
panic.
I think it's just more. There's just like I talked about the word. It's all amplified. Instead of it being okay, there's the TV or there's internet. It's like there isn't a way to escape from it. We are all, if you think about the research I do, I'm a qualitative researcher. Pre-COVID, 98% of my work was in person. Post-COVID, 80% of my work is online, right? And we're doing conversations like this, Zoom calls. Yeah, it's
Drastic.
completely changed. So, and this is a quick turn. This isn't something that's happened over the course of 10 years. This is a course that happened thing that happened over 3 years or 2 years or 1 year, so quickly that the world has shifted. This generation, we always talk about, Gen Alpha and Gen Z. They have the ability to adopt, adapt, and advance. They figure out how a paradigm shifting piece of technology or whatever it is It hits the market. They figure out how they're going to make it work for their world, and they move forward. And they have been in this just revolution of new paradigm shifting technology that's hitting the market. Again, whether it be being able to be online, it's, having the world that's getting smarter and smarter at your fingertips, not having to rely on traditional sources. So, um, socialization, learning, education, jobs, how you interact in the world and the environment is going to be very different based on your background. Someone who's grown up in Russia is going to have a different experience from someone growing up in, you know, South Carolina. They're just the way they've developed and what they've gone through to get here is different. And as a result, the way they view the world is different, and the lens they're looking at the world through is incredibly different.
Yeah, I see that. And basically, what you do in order, or what techniques you do in order to untangle and get the responses that you want, or ask the questions that you want to ask in front of this audience. What challenges, what techniques do you try to use in order to get those insights when basically you ask this audience that sometimes they don't want to be asked, and they just
Yeah.
don't want to be bothered?
So I
What you
think
do?
part of that is just practice. I mean, this is all I've done. I work with adults. I'm an adult. I talk to adults. A lot of clients will hire me for their youth work, and I do all their work. But it takes a special skill to work with this audience. I've done my whole career has been with kid, teen, young adults. So I probably would have a hard time telling you exactly all the things that I do that are different to talk with this audience, to make them feel more comfortable, to make them answer questions, because I just do them naturally. Because again, lots of practice. I don't have any, I'm not special. I've had lots of practice at it. But there's just the biggest thing is creating an environment where they feel safe and comfortable, and making it easy. Because I think, if you come in there and you are an authority figure, or you come in there and you're in a suit and tie, or you come in there and say, well, we're going to answer these questions and I need you. There's a vibe that you're producing. You need to create an environment where they feel comfortable, and then ask the questions in a way that they feel safe answering it. And then also, challenge them on the things that they might contradict themselves in. I've always found that, I have a technique that I use, and one of the things I did as way back when I was a teenage research was I was a trainer of moderators. And I always had one technique, always one thing that I would always do, and I still do to this day. Um, in the old days, it was in person. Nowadays, it's I would bring people in a breakout room before we start the sessions. Is I'll bring the respondents. Okay, let's just talk about the old days. I'd bring the respondents out into the hallway all together, away from their parents, away from people they may have come with, away from people that work at the facility, away from the client, and say, okay, is everybody ready to? You guys know what we're doing today? We're going to go in another room. There's going to be one of those mirrors there. The client is behind the mirror. They want to hear what you have to talk about. I have nothing to do with what we're talking about. I need brutal honesty. You guys up for talking? And inevitably they'd go, okay, all right, that's not going to work. I actually need to hear you talk. So what's something right now, anything at all that's kind of pissing you off? And I'd use that for a reason, because it was kind of provocative, pissing me off. Like, okay. So they teacher, school, homework, classes, parents, sister, whatever. And they talk. And and what would happen is there'd also be some bonding there. Oh, teacher, I'll meet you. Where do you go to school? Blah, blah, blah. So it would allow them it would break the ice. And then, again, the big thing was, to allow them to feel like they're comfortable with each other and with me. And so what I would often do is I'd leave them out in the hallway and say, hey, I'm going to go check, make sure the client's ready to go. And I'd leave them in the hallway, or again, in the breakout room, and I'd walk out, or I'd sign off or click off, and come back, and they'd all be talking to each other. Now, typically in this situation, they'd all be staring at their phones, but I've created an environment where they feel like they're comfortable talking with one another. That's just one little example, but it just allows. I've set a stage. Where am I? I'm somewhere between a teacher and a peer. I'm not in the middle. I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not authority figure. I'm not their best friend. I'm somewhere in the middle. So again, I'll talk to them. I'll challenge them. I will have a conversation with them. I'm definitely not going to be trying to use their vernacular. That's a big no-no. Don't do that if you're a market researcher. That's just comes off every time as cringy, which is part of their vernacular. But anyway, you don't want to use that. Um, and make them feel comfortable and willing to just talk with you. And again, all the questions that I'll ask, I'll make sure that I'm asking in a way that they feel comfortable in answering. And if they say something that's exactly the opposite, they said something before, I will challenge them on it. Come on, a second ago you just said this. Now you're saying this. Wait, what do you mean? And then it's the way you would interact with friends. It's not like again an authority figure talking down or at. It's talking with.
That's amazing how you position yourself. You're not the father or the teacher or the friend. You're someone, who's asking questions. You lay the basically you melt the ice, and you do basically after that you create like an interactive conversation among them. You let them engage, and then you come in asking the question. Of course, it requires a lot of experience and knowledge, and that thing that this is what you're doing. Let's shift a little bit about how brands are getting right and getting wrong about this group. Of course, you talk about social buffering, then and also I think around FOMA, that is the fear of
Missing
mild
out.
awkwardness, right? Like
FOMO. Oh yeah, yes. FOMA. That was mine.
yeah,
There's
yes,
FOMO is fear of missing out, and
FOMO
FOMA, which is
and
fear
FOMA,
of mild awkwardness,
yeah.
even mild awkwardness. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And you said that this is amplified now because there is always like a camera, right? And any small fox will be filmed or go viral, right? So yeah, how these social buffering and FOMA actually shape Gen Z behavior day to day, and what brands are and researchers keep getting wrong about it.
Um. Well, I mean, I think the challenge is it really goes back to the idea of if you expect them to do it the way you did it, you're probably going to be wrong because they just don't look at the world that way. I look at the world as almost like a pendulum. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I look at the world as sort of like a pendulum, where Gen Z has a way they want things done. The world is this way, and we're going to have to sort of come closer to meeting in the middle because they're not going to get exactly the way they want, and the world isn't going to get the way they want. It's going to have to shift. But I think we're going to have to get closer to Gen Z than they're going to have to get to us because again, they have a different perspective and they do things differently. I mean, even within Gen Z, I see differences. So again, I'm using my kids as an example. I have three kids. From my oldest, who's 23, to my youngest, who's 18, there's different behavior. My oldest will talk to his friends on the phone. My youngest will say, "Why would I talk to them on the phone? I'll just text them. I'll just text them. Why don't you just call them? No, I'll just text." Okay. I said to my daughter, she was going down to LA for something she was doing. And I said, well, look, let me just give you some cash just in case. And she said, what would I do with that? Yeah, what would I do with that? She had no idea because her whole world has been, I mean, obviously she knows what cash is, but like there's no reason why she would need it because she's got her phone, she's got her debit card, everything. Actually, she's got her phone. That's what all she needs. So it's just a matter of realizing that the world has shifted and the way things are done has shifted. So if you expect things to be different, sorry, expecting things to be the way you did it as a kid, you have to realize, okay, maybe not. That's not the way it's going to be done. That's not the way things are happening. So the brands are doing it right are the ones who are thinking about this new perspective and trying to adjust and adapt.
Do they have for young generation? Do you feel that they are well prepared, um, and they understand that conversation when you provide them with the insights, or you
I'm
feel
sorry,
that they need a
I
little
don't
bit
understand the
more?
question. I'm sorry. One more time, if you
No,
could. Re-
yeah, sorry. My question is asking how do you feel brands are prepared to understand this population? How well prepared to understand the nuances and the differences of this group?
I think that some brands are getting it, but I think a lot of brands are still, there's the gap we talked about in that beginning. In the beginning, if you look, I have a whole series of, you know, I think it was something like, 80% of brands think that they're hitting Gen Z and right on the money, and 30% of Gen Zs agree. There's just a huge gap. And that if you look at banking, if you look at real estate, if you look at retail, if you look at fast food or food and beverage, it's all the gap is there because again, you're turning around a battleship. That Gen X boomers in the workforce are used to the way things are done, and things need to be shifted in order to work. And it's not an instant. The world is changing in an instant, but 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 the way things are done aren't. Because even if you have AI and everything else, like we're all trying to figure out how to work AI into the system. How does that work? How do we use it? How do we use it appropriately? How do companies use it? How do educators use it? Uh, how do parents use it? How do kids use it? So it's challenging. I mean, how do you make it work? Um, and I think we're all still figuring that out at the end of the day for AI.
Yeah. And I imagine that you may have good conversation with clients that understand how to basically get those insights more efficiently and have a better conversation with this audience, right?
Yeah, I mean, some have a better approach and they have the better mindset. I think, I mean, um, I think from a research perspective, we're living in an interesting time because we are sort of caught in the middle of what is research that should and must be done by humans and what is research that should and must be done by AI. Um, and where do you mix the two? And I think the challenge is uh, if you lean too heavily on AI, you are talking to yourself. I always give an example, and I'm not sure if this is the question, but I'll give it to you anyway. Stop me if you want me to. But when I was um, moderating way back in the day, I was doing a project for craft singles. Craft singles are the ones that are we were wrapped in plastic. I don't even know if they still make them anymore, but anyway, craft singles. And we did a series of individual interviews with 7 to 10 year olds, and these were quite a few of them. I think we did like 20 of them, and we spoke to one kid, and one kid said, and he said it was a very articulate 7 year old, and he said having craft singles with me is like having my mom with me, and we were like, oh my god, oh my god, that's the nugget, that is it, that's the thing, that is the thing, the insight that we can stop right now. Now that's one kid out of 20. Now, if AI is looking at that, that's not what everybody said. That's not what we're hearing. That's not generally, but it takes the skill of a market researcher, of a marketer to understand that, okay, that's the nugget that we have to then build on. So it's a matter of using it in a way that's going to help and assist. I don't think, when I've gone to conferences and I've seen these things that they have AI moderators and virtual respondents, and it's like, well, okay, so then who are we talking to? You're making at this point you're making it's all pretend. I mean, it's it's okay. I mean, it's better than nothing, but that's about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because when I have talked with clients, I have seen clearly these two approaches or these two positions, right? One said, hey, yeah, I love companies like Listen Labs because they automate everything, and I feel that I can complete one study in less that blah 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 time. And then I go the other side of the spectrum that is more qualitative in approach, or maybe is the researcher itself, or is maybe related more with creation and innovation. That is, no, I need to be involved in the research, because otherwise, if I am not connected through my emotions, through the people, I really can't get insights. Yeah,
I
the
think at the
data is there.
Yeah. No, I think at the end of the day, it's a combination, right? There's no question that AI can provide a tremendous amount of help with analysis and coming up with things that are coming through. And there's a lot of advantages to AI. I don't think it's just oh, we have to put our head in the sand and we don't want to use that. Well, certainly there's great uses for it. It's just that I think you need a human eye to be looking at the results and seeing that one kid say it's like having my mom there with me, and not pull that into, well, that's not what we heard overall. What we heard overall was that Kraft singles are a nutritious snack for my child, or that my parents make me eat it, or it tastes good in my sandwich. So you need to be able to have experienced people pull those nuggets out with an assist from AI.
Yeah, 100%. And having the human in the center of the equation is basically super important on that regard. So let's talk about the clients and your process, right? So basically, GTR has an incredible client roster. We have worked with Disney, Google, Nike, right? And clearly a strong reputation in this space. I always curious how that translates into growth. So how do you actually find and win new clients like the ones you have been talking about today? And if you wanted a lot more of them, how you will go and get more clients like those?
I think that's the never-ending question. It's a matter, our world has shifted. In the old days, pre-COVID, there was what I like to call the before times. You would do some focus groups, and then you'd go out for dinner, and then you'd have some drinks, and then you'd get to know the person, and you develop a relationship. Nowadays, we have a conference like we're having right now, and at the end of the conference, I press leave, and that's it. We're done. So our business is about relationships. So I think, it's much more challenging than ever before. Even, in the old days, I'd go to Chicago and I'd set up 10 meetings with people just to kind of have a coffee or whatever, and talk and just catch up, or introduce myself, or give an excerpt of my trend report, or my Gen Z presentation, or whatever. But nowadays, people don't work from their offices anymore. There's not as many, it's harder to get people, to respond to these things. So I think that it's a challenge these days. I think, again, because our business is all about relationships, it's about doing whatever you can to sort of boost those relationships and make connections with people. Because if I can make a connection with someone, and then maybe share an excerpt of my Gen Z presentation, so they not only get a sense of who I am, but also how I think. That's going to allow me to sort of get in the door, at least to have a conversation. Um, but it is definitely more challenging than ever before. And I talk to a lot of people that are coming into the industry, and just say, it's you have to do your legwork, because it's harder to get those meetings. It's harder to get return phone calls. It's harder to get, and even when you do, it's hard to get on the in the onboarding process. So some of it is partnering with other companies, partnering with larger agencies. And it's just developing and working, and not letting any of your current relationships be taken for granted, because they're all important. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's a great answer, but it's just the way the world's right now.
100%. Yeah, it's the reality. I mean, marketing right now is dying from some people from the old, like open rates, email open rates have been reducing. But at the same time, that's like a new shift of more like co-collaborations, and I really
Hmm.
like our industry. It has a very good, a decent way that different partners can grow together and collaborate on that regard. But yeah, I follow what you mentioned, and I 100% with it. So yeah, let me ask a couple questions about the next generation of youth research, thinking about forward looking. Gen Alpha, right? It's already here. Born in 2010 onward, um, algorithmically, they're native from day one, wielding an estimate of 28 billion in direct spending power. So, and the concept of Z alpha, that blurry overlap between the Gen C Gen Alpha is starting to show up everywhere, right? So, from someone who's been ahead of every generational curve, what does the research industry still have wrong about how to study Gen Alpha?
Um, it's a hard question. I think one thing that is challenging is that a lot of Gen Alpha are very young still. You know, you, the oldest in Gen Alpha is something like 12 or 13. I'm a qual guy. I don't do math, but they're like 12 or 13. Um, and so we're talking about a young audience, and so their attitudes and behaviors aren't really readily formed at this point. I mean, certainly they have an impact in their parental spending, just like any generation of that age. Um, so I think there is you know it I talk about Gen Z, for example, as a whole, right? But even as I mentioned with my kids, there's obviously there's differences between their ages, and a Gen Z can be a parent, and a Gen Z can be still a teenager, you know. So there's a wide life stage. Same thing with Gen Alpha. Gen Alpha is at a wide life stage at this point, and only a small segment of them are um, are old enough to actually be marketed to and you know, for real targeted stuff. And I think so. I think the challenge is you have to realize. I think it's important to do the research to really understand them because and understand the segment of them that you're talking to. Because again, what what might appeal to a 11, 12-year old isn't going to necessarily appeal to a 7, 6-year old, and they may not even understand it. So you have to be careful about making assumptions about a population that aren't even fully developed, that are still, very undeveloped as a generation. Um, but they're important, and you have to realize that the world that they're in is, they're growing up as AI natives. What is that going to mean? How is that going to change? How is that going to change the way they, everything from how they're educated to what kind of jobs are going to be available to them, to what kind of careers they're going to need to work toward. Um, so how to researchers change? I don't know. I mean, I think researchers need to take it one day at a time because it's changing so quickly. It just I don't again it's I don't have an amazing answer to that except that our world is changing faster than ever before because of AI. Like a job today is not a job tomorrow. Um, it'll be interesting to see how things change in the next year or two.
Yeah, I agree. And let me ask you something. What is the minimum age that you like I used to get like a conduct research with?
I prefer to talk to like 7 years old and up, although I have talked to 4-year olds, 4, 5, and 6. You can't really talk to them very long. You have a few minutes. And sometimes what I'll do is we do what I call stacked groups. We talk to the parent and the kid. So maybe you recruit them both together. And then you talk with the parent for a little bit. Or sorry, we start with the kid and you plan for maybe 15 minutes with the 4 or 5-year old. And get as much information as you can out of them in terms of maybe you're showing them something, getting their reaction, having see what they think about things, and then sending them out and talking with the parents. I think a trained psychologist or psychologist can maybe a child psychologist can have different kinds of conversations, but I typically prefer go a little bit older because it is hard to get anything of real substance out of someone. If you think about asking a child why they like this food that they're eating, because it tastes good. Well, why do you think it tastes good? Because it's yummy. Well, why? Because I like it. You might have to dig deeper than that. I can't. That's why I say 7-year olds on up.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Because I had done like a quantitative surveys with, very, easy, like a graphics and like a very short, but I don't recall, maybe a couple of focus groups for milk modifiers with small kids. But yeah, otherwise it's better to get, at least 10 years and more, in order to get those questions. So yeah. And coming back to your previous answer, yes, I mean, it's a challenge, and at the same time everything is shifting very quickly, very rapidly in terms of platform solutions, approaches. So I think we'll still need to see what is going on next. um on your regard, you still stick to like a traditional, like a one-on-one interviews, and also you use like a platforms or specific apps, or other kind of AI based solutions?
So we do traditionally, I mean, we do a lot of, focus groups, individual interviews. We do ethnographies. We do, whether it be virtual or in person, consumer journeys, store visits, shop alongs. There's lots of ways of doing this. There's certainly platforms that we can use, whether it be something as just simple as a simple platform like Discuss.io, or a company called Do Reveal, which helps with analysis. There's quite a few companies that help with analysis. You feed all the data in, and it'll help you with to sort of find some things, find specific quotes, find trends. But again, I'm looking through it. It's not just expecting it to write the report for me. I've got to manage that process.
Fine.
I've been going to some research conferences, and every single research conference, they're all sponsored by AI based companies. At the end of the day, full service market research firms who offer virtual respondents and AI moderation, and qualitative and quantitative. So I think what will happen at the end of the day, it's going to be just like everything else. There will be a lot of these things that come out, and then there'll be the few that float to the top, and that are really adopted and used in our industry.
100%. From time to time, I go to it, to conferences here, and I also go to conferences in Latin America. They develop their own platform. So we have there, like, the Americans and the Latin Americans, but at the end of the day, is who handle the relation with the client and who is able to convey those insights that
Yeah.
that matters.
I was just going to say the big thing right now is everybody, because of this, clients are expecting a faster pace because, well, AI can do it in a minute. Well, can't we get it? So I think that is a uphill battle that we'll have to continue to moderate, to make sure that they're not, the expectations aren't like, well, that's, if you want, there's a happy medium between too fast and too slow. We had a whole conversation in a research industry group. It was an email chain that went, and it was this long conversation about the length of reports these days. And one person said, "Oh, I write 100-page reports," and I'm like, "100-page report? Who the heck is reading a 100-page report? Nobody's reading that. Why would you write a 100-page report? People want a report they want a 10-page report that's really, really concise and clear and has all the insights and ready to go. They want it quickly. They don't want to wait for 3 weeks for a 100-page report, in my opinion."
Yeah,
Anyway,
hundred
you were
percent.
saying
I
different.
mean,
Yeah.
a lot of things is educating the clients and make them understand why you need those days. Always they will try to cut that, but at least you can start with, a justification, because every mental process needs some time, right? So yeah. So yeah, 25 years, hundreds of focus groups, Fortune 1000 clients, and you still describe this work very human and with real enthusiasm. What is the thing that is still gets you out of bed for this? The problem you can wait to get your hands on every day?
I think I'm very lucky in that I get to talk to these generations about typically interesting and fun things. I'm not typically, I don't do any pharmaceutical research. I'm not talking about policy. I'm not talking about insurance for the most part, although I have done insurance work. Um, it's video games, it's potato chips, it's jeans, it's entertainment and technology. It's really interesting stuff. And
Fun
and I
stuff.
gotta say, yeah, it's fun. And the audio and typically when you're talking about to people about things that are interesting, they're interested to talk to you about it. Think about video games. Some teenager gets to talk about video games for an hour and a half or 2 hours. They're psyched. This is good news. They're being paid for something they love to talk about. It's not all like that, but that's fun. And then there's the other side of the coin, which I also love, which really excites me. It's this sort of social marketing work. So it's anti-tobacco, sexual assault prevention, drug use prevention, which I've done a tremendous amount of work in that category, which helps me feel better about um, uh, getting kids to buy stuff they don't need by helping the world in some way. You know, stopping kids from smoking, stopping kids from using meth, stopping kids from getting abused online. Those things also really make me feel good. Is that we're doing something to help the world in some way.
That's great. Let's keep you younger. Gary, has been a fantastic conversation. The way you put language to things the rest of us only has have noticed is great. So this awkwardness, social buffering, FOMA, that's exactly the kind of thinking that we went basically to broadcast. Um, and then that's great. So where can people find about GTR Consulting if they want to connect?
Sure, certainly my website, GTRconsulting.com, our LinkedIn page, Gary Rudman from GTR Consulting. And if you want to do something fun, we also have a storytelling thing that I do. It's the Fly Story Slam, theflystoryslam.com.
Okay, that's good. I will share that. That's a wrap on this one. Huge thanks to Gary Rodman for being so generous with his time and his thinking. There was a lot on here on how to actually understand the next generation of consumers that will continue evolving. If you got something of it, do me a favor, hit subscribe, and drop a comment with your take. We'll see you on the next episode of Signal and Insights. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Gary.